So you've brought us a really fascinating book to dive into this time, living in the light.
Mm.
I think a lot of our listeners are familiar with Shakti Gawain and her work.
Oh, yeah.
We also have, alongside that, some of your notes on it, some insights that you've had.
Exactly. And I think our mission here is to kind of, go beyond just like summarizing the book.
Yeah.
And really extract kind of the most important ideas, and to give people sort of a clear,
Right.
kind of a clear understanding of personal transformation from Gawain's point of view.
Right. That's right.
Yeah.
Yeah, we're looking at excerpts from the book itself.
Yeah.
And then also these notes that you've provided.
Mm-hmm.
And one thing that really struck me was this idea that runs throughout the whole thing of a kind of like a
Yeah.
planetary shift almost, like a shift in consciousness.
Totally.
Or a move from like an old world
Yes.
to a new world.
Yeah.
And she says, and this is a quote, "We are living in a very exciting and powerful time. On the deepest level of consciousness, a radical transformation is taking place. Our old world is dying, and a new world is coming into being."
Yes.
So what is this new world, I guess? Like, what does that even mean?
Well, I think it all starts, according to Gawain, with recognizing this sort of universal intelligence or creative power
Right.
that exists, but not just that it exists,
Okay.
but that it resides within each of us.
So it's not like this thing that's out there
Exactly.
that we're trying to like reach.
Yeah. It's very much within, and she uses different terms for it: God, spirit, inner guidance,
Right.
universe, higher self. Find what resonates.
Yeah.
I mean, she literally says the foundation for life in the new world is built on the understanding that there is a higher intelligence in the universe that is the source and substance of all existence.
Okay. So how do we connect with this thing? How do we tap
She
into it?
fiddled.
Okay. So intuition is like the key.
Absolutely. It's our guidance system.
Yeah.
It's our, a way of tapping into that inner wisdom.
So how does she talk about like intuition
Yeah.
in the universal mind?
Well, she says, the intuitive mind, able to tap into a deep storehouse of knowledge and wisdom, the universal mind.
Okay. So what is the universal mind? I mean, is that like,
Oh my gosh, yeah, that is
like a brain floating out in space?
Well, it's not,
Yeah.
no, it's not like a literal brain,
Okay.
but it's more this concept that there's this sort of interconnected awareness, and that when we tap into our intuition, we're actually tapping into
Okay.
this vast reservoir of knowledge and wisdom. And to make this a little bit more tangible, she offers a meditation. You visualize that you have a wise being living inside of you. This wise being is really a part of you.
Okay.
You can communicate with it by silently talking to it, making requests, asking questions.
Right.
Yeah.
So you're almost like
Right.
consulting this wise being
Yeah.
within yourself.
Absolutely. It's sort of like having that inner advisor.
And by trusting our intuition, how does that affect our lives?
Well, she says, life starts to flow a lot easier. You start to have more synchronicities.
Okay.
You're not struggling so much.
Right.
Because you're really aligned with that inner wisdom.
And from there, like the idea of being a creative channel comes in.
Right? Yes, exactly. To whatever degree you listen to and follow your intuition, you become a creative channel for the higher power of the universe.
Okay.
And I love this analogy that she uses. She compares it to a pipe organ,
Oh, yeah.
you know, and the universal life force is like the air flowing through the pipes.
Okay.
And we're each like an individual pipe with our own unique structure
Yeah.
and experiences, which shapes the way that flow comes through and
Right,
creates
yeah.
a unique sound. But we're all connected to that same source.
That's a nice image. Okay, so now she talks about the many selves that we have within us.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, we're not just like one thing.
Right.
Right.
Right. Right. And she says that we have these different energies or facets, or as she puts it, selves within us.
Mm.
And because we live in a world of duality, each of those has an opposite.
Right.
Right. And so it's really about recognizing all of these, developing them, understanding them, integrating them.
So it's like
Yeah.
we're not trying to be this one
No.
perfect, polished version of ourselves.
No, not at all. It's really about embracing all of those
Okay.
different parts.
And this also includes like
Yes.
our shadow side,
Mm-hmm.
like the things that we try to maybe
Absolutely.
not look at so much.
The things that we deny, the things that we suppress.
Mhm.
And she says, everything in the universe wants to be accepted. All aspects of creation want to be loved, appreciated, and included.
Okay.
So it's not about pushing those parts away, but about actually bringing them into the light and saying, okay, you're a part of me too.
Right. And this is connected to this idea that the world is our mirror. Like
Yes.
our outer world is reflecting our inner
Absolutely.
world.
And it can be a really powerful concept, and she says, the two of you are probably mirrors for each other. It may appear that you have opposing viewpoints, but internally, you are probably similar. One of you is acting out one side of the internal conflict, while the other plays out the other side.
So if we see something in somebody else
Right.
that's really bugging us,
Right.
it might be something that we
Right.
are trying to not look at in ourselves.
Exactly. And she gives this exercise where you look at both the qualities that you really admire in someone, but also the qualities that you find irritating. And just to kind of see how that's reflecting something back to you.
So it's like a really deep self-awareness practice.
Yeah. Yeah. It's about really taking responsibility for our inner world.
Okay. So we've been talking a lot about this inner world. What about like our physical existence?
Mm-hmm.
How does she see?
Well, she says that
and fitting into this.
It's really important to integrate spirit and form.
Okay.
So to really bring together that spiritual essence with our physical body.
Okay.
And our engagement in the world.
Right.
And she says that it's important to have those periods of introspection.
Right.
To turn inward. And sometimes, in those periods, old feelings and patterns will come up.
Yeah.
And she says, in this process of learning to trust yourself, many old feelings and deep emotional patterns will come to the surface to be healed and released.
So we shouldn't be afraid of those.
No, not at all.
Those are like opportunities to heal.
Yeah.
Okay. So another thing that she talks about is the inner male and female. And I think this is important to say that this is not just about like our biological gender.
Right, not at all. It's about energies.
Okay.
Everyone has both masculine and feminine energies within them.
So what would you say are some of the characteristics of like the female aspect?
The female aspect, she really associates with the intuitive self.
Okay.
She says, I think of our female aspect as our intuitive self. It is the receptive aspect, the open door through which the higher intelligence of the universe can flow.
Okay.
So that receptivity, the openness to guidance, to wisdom.
Right.
And then the male aspect, she sees as sort of the action and the clarity, the focus that supports the intuition.
So they're like partners.
Yes, exactly. It's a dance between the two.
And she talks about like an old male and a new male.
Yeah.
So what's the difference there?
So the old male, she says, is really stuck in the intellect and control. And they often try to suppress intuition.
Right.
Whereas the new male is someone who trusts intuition and supports it.
And she thinks that we're moving as a society more from this old male to...
Yeah, she says, individually and collectively, we are shifting from a position of fear and control into surrender and trust of the intuitive.
Interesting. Okay. Now, I know from your notes that a lot of these ideas, especially around the male and female, were influenced by a teacher of hers named Shirley Luthman.
Yes, that's right.
Who was she?
Shirley Luthman was a really important figure in Shakti Gawain's life. The sources say that Gawain actually went to Luthman's group for like 5 years.
Wow.
Yeah, every week. And Luthman really influenced her understanding of metaphysics, especially this concept of the male and female.
Yeah.
Like, the notes literally say, many of the ideas in Living in the Light, including the concept of male and female, were inspired by Shirley.
Yeah. So it's like she was really a mentor.
Absolutely.
Okay, so going back to this idea of the body and energy flow, she mentions the pipe organ analogy again here.
Yes, she does.
How does that relate to our physical well-being?
Well, she says, it's really important to keep our channel open. Yeah. And by channel, she means, our body, our emotions, our personality. And the way to do that is by following our intuition. Following your intuition is the primary way to create a strong body personality structure and learning to follow its direction.
Okay. And what happens when we block those feelings? What happens when we don't let that energy flow?
Well, she says it creates all sorts of problems, not just emotional discomfort, but also physical tension, imbalances, even illness.
Okay.
And she gives some really specific examples, like headaches, she says, can often be a sign of internal conflict.
Right.
Colds might indicate that your body just needs to rest and clear out old energy.
Okay.
Allergies, she says, could be a sign that you're not trusting your intuition.
Interesting.
Back pain, she says, could be about feeling overwhelmed by having to support other people.
Mm-hmm.
And she even mentions menstrual cramps as possibly being connected to not honoring the feminine within.
Oh, wow. So it's like
Yeah.
everything is connected.
Right. Mind, body, spirit.
Okay. Now, she talks a lot about awareness.
Yeah.
And, it seems like that's pretty important.
Absolutely. She says, at its core, personal transformation is about taking responsibility for our inner world,
Okay.
our thoughts, our feelings, our beliefs.
Right.
And awareness is key to that because it helps us step out of those unconscious patterns.
So those things that we're just doing automatically.
Right. Exactly.
That are not really serving us.
Yeah.
Okay.
And so when we become more aware, we can make more conscious choices. We can have better relationships. We can integrate those disowned selves that we talked about.
Now, she also talks about like doers and beers.
Mm-hmm.
What are the characteristics of those two?
Well, she says doers are really action-oriented. They're proactive.
So.
They like to get things done.
Right.
They're comfortable taking risks. They have a lot of outgoing energy.
Right.
But they might struggle with being receptive, with being vulnerable, and with just being still.
Okay. And what about beers?
Beers are more about inner attunement. They're present moment oriented. They can relax. They can appreciate the simple things.
Mm-hmm.
They're nurturing.
Right.
But they might find it hard to initiate action or to assert themselves.
Okay.
And they might be worried about what other people think.
Right. And so it sounds like most people are kind of one or the other.
Yeah, I think so. I think we all have a tendency towards one or the other.
And she says intuition can help us balance those.
Yes, exactly. Because your intuition will guide you towards what you need to cultivate.
Okay.
So if you're a doer, you might be guided towards more receptive activities.
Right.
If you're a beer, you might be guided towards more action.
Okay. So now let's talk about those disowned selves again.
Okay.
What are they exactly?
Okay. So disowned selves are basically those parts of us that we've rejected,
Okay.
the energies, the qualities that we've denied because of maybe early experiences or messages that we got that made us think they weren't okay. And for every primary self, she says, there's usually a disowned self.
So like an opposite.
Yeah.
Okay.
So, for example, someone who's really strong might have disowned their vulnerability.
Right.
Someone who's really peaceful might have disowned their inner warrior.
Okay.
And the problem is these disowned selves, they don't go away.
Right.
They're still there.
And so we need to like integrate them.
Exactly.
What does that look like?
Well, first, we need to recognize our primary selves.
Okay.
The parts that we're comfortable with.
Right.
And then we need to start to allow those disowned selves to emerge.
Okay.
Without judgment.
Right.
And then we can start to loosen that identification with only our primary selves.
Okay.
And the benefits of this are huge.
Okay. So what are the benefits?
Well, we become more authentic. We can have deeper intimacy in our relationships.
Right.
And we feel a greater sense of balance and wholeness.
Okay. So now what are some of the specific consequences of like suppressing those feelings?
Oh,
or suppressing those selves?
Yeah.
What happens?
It can really mess with our energy flow.
Okay.
It can create blockages.
Right.
And that can lead to, emotional discomfort, physical problems. It can also make us express those emotions in unhealthy ways.
Okay.
Like irritability, passive aggression, even anger.
Right.
And it can make us feel more emotionally pained,
Mm-hmm.
And most importantly, I think, it blocks our intuition.
Right.
We can't hear that inner voice as clearly.
Okay.
And so we end up feeling powerless. Like we're not in control of our lives.
Okay. So the alternative to this is really to cultivate intuition, right?
Absolutely.
So what does that look like in practice?
Well, she says intuition is really our connection to that deeper wisdom.
Okay.
To the universal mind.
Okay.
And it allows us to flow and to be in harmony. She says it's like an inner conductor.
Okay.
That guides us towards our highest good.
Right.
And it's different from our rational mind.
Okay. How so?
Well, the rational mind is really limited by our past experiences and logic.
Okay.
Okay. But intuition can tap into something much bigger.
Right.
So she says we need to trust those gut feelings, those nudges that we get.
Okay.
Even before we understand them logically.
Right. And the reward for doing that is feeling more alive.
Yeah.
Okay. Towards the end of the book, she gives a summary of like personal transformation principles.
Mm-hmm.
What are some of those?
Well, she talks about choosing to live in the light.
Okay.
By acknowledging all parts of ourselves.
Okay.
Recognizing that higher power within.
Right.
Accessing our intuition. Becoming a creative channel.
Okay.
Exploring our many selves. understanding the world as our mirror, integrating spirit and form, balancing the male and female within, trusting intuition, being in touch with our feelings, balancing being and doing, creating new world relationships,
Right.
seeing the body as a feedback mechanism,
Right.
and understanding that personal transformation leads to world transformation.
Wow.
So it's really like a whole package.
Okay. And she also talks about these like new world concepts, like in terms of money and relationships.
Yeah.
How does she see those differently?
Well, with money, she talks about moving away from scarcity
Okay.
and seeing it as a reflection of energy flow.
Right.
You know, trusting in abundance.
Okay.
And with relationships, she says it's about cultivating wholeness within ourselves first,
Okay.
so that we can have relationships that are based on mutual growth
Right.
and not dependency, like moving beyond those old roles and expectations.
She also talks a little bit about parenting in this new world.
Yeah.
What does she say about that?
Well, she says that parents should really see themselves as channels for the universe to flow through,
Okay.
and that they should recognize their children as powerful, intuitive beings.
Right.
You know, and the best thing they can do is to live authentically themselves.
So like be the example.
Right, right.
Okay.
And to communicate openly and honestly with their kids.
And how about work and play?
Oh, she says, you know, when we align our work with our purpose
Okay.
and our passions,
Right.
and we're in the flow, then work becomes a form of play.
Okay.
And money just flows naturally.
Right.
Because we're aligned.
And what about health?
Well, she says health is a reflection of our energy flow.
Okay.
And our alignment with our truth.
Right.
She says dis-ease is a message that something's off.
Right.
And that we need to cultivate self-trust and self-love to be healthy.
Okay. And she ends on this idea of like transformation spreading outward.
Right. Right. That our own personal transformation actually contributes to a larger shift in consciousness.
Right.
And she mentions this thing called the 100th monkey syndrome.
Okay.
Which is, you know, this idea that once a certain number of individuals have learned something, then suddenly everybody knows it.
Oh, wow.
Even without direct contact.
That's wild. Okay, so after all of this, what do you think is like the most important takeaway for our listeners?
I think ultimately it's about recognizing that personal transformation is a journey of interconnection.
Okay.
It's about listening to our intuition, integrating all parts of ourselves, and creating a life that's both fulfilling and an expression of our unique potential.
I love that.
Mm-hmm.
And as you go forward, think about which of these principles really speaks to you.
Yeah.
What's that one thing you could do to maybe explore that a little bit deeper? Maybe connect with that wise being inside yourself?
Yes.
Or just kind of meditate on this idea of being a channel for the universe's creativity.
It's a powerful journey.
It really is.
Yeah.
Thanks so much.
Thanks for having me.